Here in Alabama. Why this topic?
So I've made films in and around the justice system before, and I've been interested in incarceration. Um, and I think that Alabama has had rumblings about its prison system before. I knew a bit about it, but not much because the Alabama prisons are so secretive. And we had the opportunity to get into one of the facilities in Alabama and film some things. And it was clear that there were many areas of the prison that we were not allowed to go into. And when we started to ask questions or talk to the men, the authorities got very uncomfortable and eventually told us we'd stop filming. And so we realized from our conversations with the men that there were some terrible things happening that were being kept secret from the public. So we felt we had to engage and try to understand better what was going on.
Well, the cell phone is just so unique, compelling, and of course, heartbreaking.
Well, cell phone footage from inside the prisons has been a phenomena that has been in the state since for many years now, I think since around 2013. And news stations across the state have been reporting on that and have been using that footage to show us the reality inside. I think what makes the film different is that we're interweaving that footage across 2 hours of storytelling that put the footage in conversation with both the stories inside, but then also outside. A mother following her son as she's trying to get answers about what happened to him inside Donaldson Correctional Facility, the prison construction project, the parole rates. And so I think the cell phone footage being in conversation with this larger story kind of allows you to appreciate it in a more in-depth way.
And when we've spoken to Governor Ivey about the prisons, her administration says we've done more for Alabama prisons than any other governor in history. They are building the first new prisons in 30 years. Is that the Alabama solution? And what should the solution be?
Well, first of all, I think one of the most notable things that Charlotte and I found from doing this investigation is how many people were in Alabama were unaware of how bad things were in the prison, had just heard anecdotally or seen a story of yours or something that seemed isolated, like an isolated incident. And when I think the people of Alabama understand what's happening, it bothers them tremendously. It's an extremely warm population. The people that we met were incredibly helpful to us and very caring. People who let us stay in their homes because they knew that we were working hard and there was no hotel nearby, as Sandy Ray did, the mother of Stephen Davis. So that's a big thing I think that we took away from it is that this is a beautiful state where some terrible things are happening, and the reason that people aren't doing anything about it is that the people are not being welcomed in, the journalists are not being allowed to be in the prison, all under the heading of like sort of safety and security. That to us seems like an opportunity for trouble.
How Governor Ivey is responding to this deadly crisis. And since the Department of Justice has come in, things have gotten worse. We've seen the death rates. You've done some incredible reporting on this, nearly double up until, or actually double up until today. We've seen the suicide rates double. We've seen the murder rates, increase. So I think there are key indicators that this is not a crisis under control, and we know that the construction is not the answer. And it's also costing taxpayers an incredible amount of money. The facility in Elmore County started at being projected, around half, I think $600 million. Now it's up to 1.3 billion. So this is something that we think the population in Alabama should be questioning, the state about. Is this the solution?
And one state official told us that when these inmates, because a good portion of them are eventually going to get out, are suffering from PTSD. When you look at what they're living in day to day, you have to wonder what kind of parolees are we turning out? What rehabilitation is going on?
It's clear that the public wants safety. We want safety. We all care about safety for our families. But if we bring people into these institutions that are designed to correct or rehabilitate them so that they can rejoin society, and we expect that after they're traumatized in these places, fearing for their lives and watch other people lose their lives, sometimes at the hands of the guards who are supposed to take care of them, it's unlikely that those people are going to come out and be able to rejoin society in a normal way if you hand them $50 or a bus ticket. And then we're surprised at their high rates of recidivism. We don't think that people have to permanently be incarcerated. And we don't think that there is no solution. There are states, for example, Maine has a very advanced and quite beautiful model. It's still a prison. People are still incarcerated for long periods of time, but they are treated humanely and they're taught skills. And that's something that, we know there's been some effort to do that in Alabama, but it's always a very, very narrow sliver of the population. And as you say, it's not just that most of them are going to get out. Nationally, I think it's more than 95% of the people that are incarcerated are not spending the rest of their lives there. So we have to be ready to bring these people back.
The drugs, which by the way, the phones they have pretty much shut down. They're putting blockers and jammers in. Were you surprised by the level and what they're involved in?
I just want to say one thing about that. I've heard various people say that the men are talking on phones that they smuggle in. That's not the case. The smuggling of phones is totally unnecessary because the cell phone market is run by the guards inside. It's a huge source of income for them, which frankly we understand. We've actually met some very humane, decent people who are guards who spoke to us. So it's not that the men are procuring these on their own, and the drugs are coming in with the guards as well. And I asked one of the prisoners that we spoke to how so many drugs, how so much volume of drugs are coming into the system, who's bringing them in. And he looked at me sort of incredulous and he said, we don't leave, right? And I thought that was an interesting answer. And there's no question that we've heard from guards and many others that is a part of the daily life of prisoners. They're going to have access to drugs. They're going to have access to cell phones because it's become a market that's not controlled in any way. Now, cutting off the cell phones has another problem because obviously this is the only way that people have been able to have any transparency about what's happening in their own state, with 25% of their general fund being spent on these prisons. So our hope is that the state realizes that they need to allow journalists, they need to allow people to have in a perhaps somewhat limited way. I don't think they expect journalists to come in every day, but certainly the ability for journalists and the public to see what's happening in the prisons could be a disinfectant to this very, very troubled system.
During COVID-19, when the prisons were closed off from public visitation and the only people going inside and out were guards, there was a spike in deaths from drugs. So that shows you that it's not from families visiting. The drugs are coming in consistently through a certain way.
Can we see a part 2, 3, and 4 down the road? Or other states? Anything planned along those lines?
Well, I mean, what's happening in Alabama is happening all over the country. Prisons in America are secret and they are running without accountability and without the public's knowledge. The difference in Alabama is that we can actually see what's happening, and there were some incredibly brave people, some brave men who were incarcerated, and some brave mothers and family members on the outside who allowed us to follow along and tell their story. But there could be, we hope that other journalists and filmmakers will look into other states and do this similar reporting so that we can tackle this national issue.
You asked a question about things that surprised us. And I would say one thing that really opened our eyes was the fact that they are willing to let many inmates go out into the communities and work. And, maybe everybody understands that if you're incarcerated, maybe it's a good idea that you have to sweep the floor or help save taxpayers some money on your incarceration. But nobody really understands that the prisoners are often the only people to perform critical tasks. In the film, you see that the drug counselor left his job in frustration, and one of the inmates took over the rehabilitation effort. Somebody who's untrained, very good natured, and wants to help these people, but actually doesn't know where all the federal money is going that is supposed to go into the rehabilitation effort, and especially drug treatment. The thing that we were maybe most surprised by is they're not just sent out to work at the governor's mansion or on a road crew or construction or sanitation, but they're actually leased out to corporations, McDonald's or the Hyundai parts distributor, or um, places like Bama Budweiser. You know, these are places that are companies who are using incarcerated labor, and it's essentially forced labor, because if you don't work, you know, Kay Ivey's even talked about criminalizing not working. And it doesn't mean that people want to be lazy. They would love to go out into the community. But the most surprising fact is that people who are deemed safe enough to work in the community are, during certain periods of time, less likely to be paroled than the people who are at the next highest custody level. So whether the state is consciously aware of it or not, or whether the government is aware of it or not, they've created a situation where the more valuable somebody is to work outside in the community, the less likely they are to have any hope to come home.
The extent at which the state uses incarcerated labor was a very big surprise to us. You know, just every county you go to, they are benefiting from the labor of these men who are being held beyond any reasonable time in very, very dangerous prisons. So that was, you know, $450 million that the state uses in unpaid services
Annually.
Annually. So that was a huge, you know, eye-opening discovery for us. And
It's also worth mentioning that when we talk about the labor being coerced or forced, again, something I think the public doesn't see happening, it's quite seriously forced, in that if people are unwell or they can't work or they choose not to do a particularly dangerous job, or they are often punished. The punishments for not working are very shocking. Their sentences can be extended because they're given disciplinaries. They are less likely to be paroled. They could be moved to a more deadly institution than the one that they're in already. And of course, they're put in solitary confinement at an incredibly high rate. Solitary is used, and this often happens in systems that are chronically understaffed. You know, it's just easier to lock somebody away, whether you're doing it to be punitive, whether you're doing it for fun, whether you're doing it because you just don't want to hear that person. You can be locking away human beings for years at a time. I spoke to corrections officers, one of whom was a captain and had retired. And I said, when you agree to put somebody, when you decide to put somebody in solitary confinement, you know, what are the rules? And he said, well, we just put them in. And I said, for a week or 2 weeks? Or he said, oh, yeah, sometimes for months. I said, you put them away for months? Do you ever put them away for 6 months? Oh, yeah. You ever put them away for a year or more? Oh, yes. Or many people have been away for a year or more in solitary confinement. And I said, well, is there a board? Do you have to go and ask about that? And he said, well, practically not really. You just have to write ongoing investigation. That's usually good enough, and you could just keep them in. So that's an example of something that if the public was aware of that and they knew this was happening to their child, or they understood it was happening to somebody that they know, right? And 45% of Americans have either been incarcerated or have a loved one who's incarcerated. They would be shocked by that too.
So you're premiering tonight. I'm sure you want a wide audience. What would you say to the average person? Oh, this is too heavy. It doesn't affect me. Going back to the point that everybody knows somebody, has somebody related, or been incarcerated. What would you push people who want to avoid this topic that they need to watch this?
You know, I think we're all one bad night away from being charged with a crime ourselves. And it's vital to the functioning of a democracy that we understand what happens to our fellow citizens when they go behind bars. And I also think that our film is not only a portrait of a system in collapse and a humanitarian crisis, you will also meet some extremely inspiring people, people who are in the most violent environment, but choosing to commit to nonviolent means of resistance, and mothers and family members who are standing up and speaking truth to power and fighting for their loved ones, despite being, treated as second-class citizens. And I think those are stories that resonate with people and that you can find meaning in the midst of the darkness.
I think it's one thing's I think good for people to do is to go to the alabamasolution.com, because there's a lot of information in there that won't be in the film. For example, we investigated the more than 1,300 deaths, even though they're just a couple who are really pointed out in the film. There's an enormous amount of data there that we provided for journalists and others so that they can continue to follow the case. And also people can put in their email address and get updates on what's happening and whether the state is making efforts to change. Charlotte, did you have a last comment?
Yeah, I just yeah, I was going to plug the website too and hope that Alabamians, uh, I, I also want to say just like we love Alabama. That's it. We love the state. Even though we're from New York, we feel like we're from Alabama now after 6 years of working on this film and analyzing some failures, but then also meeting so many incredible people who are doing remarkable work to try to fix this problem. And I think while Alabama is an example of how incarceration in America has gone off the rails, I also believe it can be the origin of a solution. And we've seen solutions come out of Alabama before with the civil rights movement, and I think we can do it again. And so we hope that this might be the start of a reckoning with a system that has destroyed many people's lives for a long time across the country.